Hi all, if you are a returning viewer, welcome back. If you're new, welcome. My name is Amira, and as promised, as I mentioned in my last video, how I'd fallen down the rabbit hole of learning about private equity specifically, but also like investing in beauty brands and investments in beauty brands and how it all works. I kind of, like I said, I fell down a rabbit hole with that and I started doing some research and I said, hey, I'm probably going to do a video on private equity. Well, here we are. Here's the video. Let's get into it. All right, guys. So this is probably the most research I've done for a video, I think, ever in the history of my channel. So I hope you appreciate it. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, hype it up, share it, let your friends and family know. I worked pretty hard on this. I made slides. Who am I? I made slides. All right, so the way I kind of decided that I wanted to talk about this, because it's a lot to talk about, and the more you talk about one thing, you kind of offshoots into another thing. And I wanted to make it easy to follow and succinct, but also give you guys the deets, you know? So what I decided to do is I've created a case study for what we're going to talk about. And I've chosen 3 brands. All of them are, or were, one of them is no longer, but the other 2, well, I guess you could say both. 2 of them were, but they're all at some point were Black-owned beauty brands. I didn't do this on purpose. This is when like, oh, let me pick brands that were owned by Black, founders or Black makeup artists. It's just the way it worked out. And the reason why I think it worked out that way is simply because, like I mentioned in my last video, is unfortunately, Black-owned brands are some of the least funded, and they're also the most likely to sort of fall prey to predatory investments, specifically private equity, things like that. So I decided to just sort of do a case study of these 3 brands so that you can kind of see how private equity works and doesn't work, what it looks like when you have private equity, when it looks like when you don't have private equity, what it looks like when you have private equity and it falls apart, and what happens when you kind of have it throughout the lifespan of your brand, and the sort of natural negative conclusion of that. So we're going to start off with what I like to call the private equity cautionary tale. But I'm going to put up a slide here because I'm going to be mentioning a lot of different things, because at the end of this video, I want to really go down the list of brands that have private equity invested in them. And honestly, guys, most brands do. Most brands do. Not all, but most brands that you see on a regular basis in retail, online, have some sort of investment in them, and they're almost always tied in some capacity to private equity, unfortunately. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. It's sort of the nature of trying to grow a brand. And I think a lot of people think that brands are started because people have love for makeup and love for beauty and love for skincare and fragrance. And that can be true. But there are a lot of brands that are started with the intention of eventually selling that brand to a large conglomerate for a lot of money and just kind of getting out of it. That's just the reality. And I think if that is the goal, if the goal is to create a brand, build it, make it incredibly successful, and then kind of give it to someone else, sell it off, private equity is probably going to be a great option. If that is not what your plan is, as you'll see with these 3 case studies, it can be kind of detrimental to your brand. So let's start off with what I like to call the ultimate cautionary tale, and that is Uoma Beauty. Okay, so starting with Uoma Beauty. Uoma Beauty was in partnership with Brain Trust Fund, which is a private equity firm. And this is going to get a little complicated because there's multiple people involved, and I actually have them like the names flipped in my mind, but I've since looked at my notes and was like, okay. So Brain Trust Fund was the original like investor. They were kind of I don't want to say they were a brand incubator, but they were kind of like who she was in partnership. They were the private equity that she was in partnership with. In 2022, Brain Trust sold Uoma Beauty out from under Sharon Shooter. The brand had been struggling at that point, and there's not a lot of details as to what was going on financially, but we know this was around the time that the Instagram had gone kind of quiet, and there was issues about people receiving their packages, and people were saying that their orders weren't getting fulfilled, that they had ordered things and had never received them, and there was just a lot of like strange things going on. The lower price brand, like in Walmart, all of the things were on clearance, and then there were products that was from the actual main brand, Uoma Beauty, that were at Harvey Nichols that were on clearance, and people were just like, what's going on? And what wound up happening is that Brain Trust sells Uoma Beauty to MacArthur. I believe it's MacArthur Beauty, which is an offshoot of another MacArthur firm, which is private equity. MacArthur decides they're the new owners, they acquire all of the assets, and that they're going to run the brand. Sharon Shooter's out. She didn't have any say. She wasn't notified of the sale. She was just out. There were other investors on the board, like Unilever, who had an investment in the brand as well, who leave, and now it's just MacArthur Beauty. And Sharon Shooter, and if you don't know, Sharon Shooter passed away in September of 2025, I think. I think it was either August or September, but I believe it was September of last year, 2025. Motorcycles go by. And before she passed away, she sued Brain Trust and MacArthur Beauty. And I was able to find the actual filing. It was filed in February 25th of 2025. And the plaintiffs were MacArthur Beauty, MacArthur Companies, MacArthur Fund, Brain Trust Fund, and Settle Funding, LLC. And what is alleged in this case, and I'm going to try to put up the actual page of the actual lawsuit. This is a case about unscrupulous corporate raiders who deceitfully and unilaterally stole a unique business that was built from the ground up by its founder, Sharon Shooter. It then goes into her being a Black-owned business and how she built the business up from the ground up, and how she catered to different skin tones. And it says here, all of Miss Shooter's efforts ultimately paid off, as she was an explosive success. She was an explosively successful beauty launch. As her company grew in its success, Miss Shooter knew that she needed to bring in more investors who could help operate the business and provide the financial resources she needed to continue to grow. Miss Shooter fell prey to wolves who appeared at her doorstep, and she ended up inviting in business partners whose primary goal was to exploit her success and take over her company and sell it for far less than it was worth, just to make a profit. So that was the main gist of her complaint. As you know, as I've said, Sharon passed away. Rest in peace to Sharon. And so this case has never gone to trial. MacArthur just owns the brand now. Basically, what happened to Sharon Shooter's company is what was probably going to happen to Pat McGrath's company had she not filed for bankruptcy. I think the fact that Sharon wasn't as involved as Pat, I think, and again, that is very, I don't know how to put this, because Sharon had taken a step back from the company. She wasn't involved in the actual day-to-day operations at that point, but she was still on the board. She was still the founder. She was still very much involved with the brand, just not on the day-to-day basis. Pat was very similar in that she was still involved with the brand, but a lot of her choices and decisions had been taken over by the company that at that point had invested in her brand. What MacArthur did is what was going to be done when that announcement of PMG selling its assets, that is what happened, except it didn't get as far as Uoma Beauty did with having a buyer. Okay, so that is basically what we're seeing here, is literally the same story. It's just that there was a way, there had been a stopgap implemented, and filing for bankruptcy was actually very smart. There's some other things going on we can get into with PMG as far as how they're handling the bankruptcy in the interim, because basically the company that was trying to sell off PMG's assets is fighting the DIP that Pat McGrath is trying to implement to help save the brand. She wants to infuse some of her own money into the brand to help it in the interim between the bankruptcy and the bankruptcy reorganization. Like, once they've gone through the process, in the interim, she wants to spend money to make sure that employees still keep their jobs and get paid, then, you know, that the business continues to run on a day-to-day. And the company that is owned, basically saying that PMG owes them money, and they want to sell all the assets to get their money back plus some. There's a dispute about how much money is owed, so that's a whole other thing. But a DIP is, I believe, I forget what it's called. It's a direct investment. Let me see. DIP stands for debtor in possession. So Pat wants to be the debtor. She wants to be the debtor in possession and say, hey, let me put this money in to infuse into the brand to keep the brand going. And the company that is basically saying that she owes them, they say she owes $42 million. She's saying, no, we owe $17 million. Big difference. Basically, this company, and I believe it's called GPA. And I'll put it up on the screen if I can find it. There's so many acronyms involved, guys, and I'm really kind of like going off the dome on this. I probably should have wrote it down. I wrote a bunch of things down, but I did not write that down. I'm like, what's it called? GPA? I'll put it up. But they are basically a company that it's quite predatory. It's private equity, but it's also a private equity company that gives loans to businesses that are in distress. And they're saying that PMG took out a loan with them and has defaulted on the loan. PMG is saying we did not default on the loan. We owed money, but we didn't owe that much money. This company is trying to basically take over the company, sell it for parts, make their money back, and also make a profit. So that is what's going on with PMG now. That's kind of like the gist of what's going on. And it's kind of what happened with Uoma Beauty, but without the infusion of a bankruptcy, a DIP investment, the founder being able to sort of step in and stop it before it went through. Sharon didn't get that option. And I think a lot of that has to do with maybe the type of deal that she had. I do feel that Pat owns her brand, like she owns her name. And I think that's playing a huge part in what's going on right now. Moving on from that, let's talk about my other case study. And that is Ami Collet. So let's get to the next brand that's in my case study, which is Ami Collet. Ami Collet was a Black-owned brand owned by Diara, and I'm going to try and say her last name correctly. It's Diara Ndai Mumbai, who is a Senegalese American who founded the company in 2021. The brand originally started off with angel investors. I have a slide, so I'm going to put it up on the screen now, and I'll use this again just to give you guys some idea of what I'm talking about. But there are different types of investors, and there are different types of ways to finance a makeup brand. And one of the ways that a lot of people do it is they bootstrap it, which means they infuse their own money in it, and they are the ones who fund it, and everything they do is coming from their pockets. And that is what we call indie brands. You know, there are indie brands that are in Sephora. There are indie brands that are in Ulta. But the majority of indie brands are the brands we see, we're talking about your Cleonas, we're talking about your Nomads, we're talking about your Singe Beauties, we're talking about your phytosurgeons, your Salt New Yorks. These are brands that the brand owners finance the brand themselves. They're direct to consumer. They are not in stores. They may have some stockists. So say for instance, like a Look Fantastic. If Look Fantastic even still around, I don't even know. Or like a Beautylish, something like that, which is not like, still technically direct to consumer, not in a big box or a large specialty chain. That's what bootstrapping is. The next up from that is having angel investors. And these are people who are individuals, or sometimes they're small little investment groups where, like, let's say 5 millionaires get together and say, hey, we want to give our money to companies and brands that have, that are creating things that we want to be a part of. A great example of sort of an angel investor, this is an example, is the brand, and this is not a beauty brand, but I just want to give this as an idea so you have an understanding of what I'm talking about. So the brand Clever Blends blew up in like 2021, 2022. They were independent and they were working, the owner was working to fund her brand herself, and she wound up getting an angel investor who happened to be Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. She was the angel investor who came in and said, I'm going to give you money out of my own pocket to help your brand grow. So you can have individual angel investors who have a special interest in your brand. They believe in the product, they believe in you, they're friends, and they want to like invest in you and the growth of your brand. Then you can have like a small little pool of people who, again, they're like a couple of millionaires and they're like, let's all pull our money and invest in things that we want to invest in. So those are angel investors. And that is what Diara had originally. She had angel investors who helped her kind of get started with her brand. She was direct to consumer for, I want to say, maybe a year before she went into Sephora. When she went into Sephora, at that point, she had a large injection of funding from L'Oreal. L'Oreal is a conglomerate. I'm going to put my little slide up now of conglomerates. And what conglomerates do is they can invest in brands all on the peripheral of what they do, outside of what they do, in the sense of they can have absolutely nothing to do with what the main conglomerate is known for, and they can invest in whatever. Take Unilever. Unilever is a conglomerate that invests in everything from, they were invested in they own Ben & Jerry's. They were also an investor in Uoma Beauty. So as you can see, it can go, their whole point is that they're trying to diversify their investment portfolio and either diversify their investment portfolio, but also diversify the brands that they own. So they kind of bring brands into the fold. With Ami Collet, L'Oreal did not want to buy her brand, but they invested in her brand, and she used that money to move into Sephora. Now, when she moved into Sephora, Ami Collet was valuated at about $5 million, being worth $5 million, which is a lot of money, but isn't a lot of money to go into Sephora. The number that I found, and I found this so interesting, is that for most brands to successfully launch in Sephora, they will need between 5 to 10 million to successfully just launch, just to get into Sephora. That is for, you have to pay for your own caps. So when you go into a store, into a Sephora, and you see a brand, a company, and you see the end cap with all of the products, that brand is paying for that spot. So you have to pay for your end caps. You have to have money set aside for if someone purchases a product and returns it, that comes out of the brand's bottom line. You have to pay for advertising. Then you have to pay the fees. And the fee to be in Sephora, from what I've read, is about 50%, which means so every time you go into Sephora and you buy an eyeshadow or whatever you're buying from Sephora, Sephora is taking 50% of that from the brand. They get a 50% cut of that before the brand ever sees anything. So you have to have enough capital and you have to have enough to cover all of that. Amicole went into Sephora when it was valuated. I believe I said 5 million, but I believe it was like between 3 and 5 million, because 3 million was injected into it from L'Oreal, as well as, I think it was 3 million total, was L'Oreal and a couple of other venture capital firms, and other investors. So the brand was valuated at 5, had an injection of 3 million, went into Sephora. It's very clear that Amicole was underfunded from the start. When you look at the numbers, and from just doing the research that I've been doing, it's very clear that the brand didn't have the capital that it needed to go into Sephora. I think Amicole might have survived had it not been in Sephora. I could be completely wrong. DRS talked about, the fact that the funds just weren't there. Like the brand just wasn't pulling in the kind of money that it needed to pull in. But I can't help but wonder if the brand could have survived had they not gone into Sephora. And again, this is an example of how Black-owned brands are either subject to predatory type of investment deals, or they get barely any investment at all. $3 million for a brand is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money, guys. It's not a lot of money when you look at brands like Rhode or Rare Beauty, or, these brands that are very well funded and invested in, and who from the jump have had the backing that they needed to succeed. I think Rhode is a perfect example of what happens when a brand is, and I don't want to sit here, I'm not gonna crap on Rhode. I've never tried a Rhode product. I had a few in my cart, and I was just like, at the time I was like, I'm good, I'm not gonna be shopping like that anymore. But that was at the moment. I'm not averse to trying any of the products. I'm not anti-Rhode. But what I want to talk about is the fact that Amicole and Rhode kind of started around the same time. And I think it's very interesting that Rhode from the start had a lot of backing and a lot of funding. Now, Rhode was also part of a brand incubator, and that helps a lot. And if I put my trusty little slide up, brand incubators are basically like mentors, and what they do is they can help you develop the product. They can sort of aim you towards funding, so you can get great funding for your brand, and it can grow in that way, which is what happened with Rhode. And Hailey Bieber is an owner, but she's a co-owner of Rhode. She had a business partner, and her business partner is the person or the people who invested all of that money into the brand to help it be what it is, with her as the name and the face, and her sort of creative vision. So she plays a huge part in it, but she's not bootstrapping. She didn't bootstrap that company, But what I do find really interesting, and that I think was actually really smart for Rhode, is that they did not go into Sephora right away. Rhode had been around for a few years before they ever went into Sephora, and they had already reached a point where they could handle the amount of capital needed to go into Sephora and survive in Sephora. They had enough brand recognition. They had enough, brand recognition and hype. Everyone was talking about Rhode. They had enough sales. They had all of the things that they needed to sort of survive any sort of hiccups that they would have going into Sephora, because it is a huge transition monetarily, and you have to scale up. This is another reason why so many brands turn to private equity, because if you are someone who wants to have, you may want a small brand. Like if you want to stay an indie brand and you want to just bootstrap your company, and you want to, make your own products, like Phytosurgeons in Salt, New York, they run their labs. Like the owners of the brands are the people who are formulating the products and creating the products. And it's actually really cool. I think that's amazing, but you have to want to do that, and you have to want to retain that kind of control, and you have to want to not grow super fast in that way. So your brand will grow slower and more organically, but you'll have more control over what you're releasing into the world. But if you're a company that's like, my dream is to be in Sephora, be in Ulta, then you're going to need help with that. And there are so many private equity firms and companies that are invested, their whole job is to invest in beauty brands. I explained to you guys in the last video what private equity was. I will do it again. I will read my brother's trusty little quote that I read in the last video just to give you an idea. And I'm going to read it while I have my little trusty little slide on the screen so that we can sort of reiterate what private equity is all about. He says, a private equity firm is a capital stacking, deal hunting investment shop that raises big pools of capital from institutional and ultra wealthy investors, targets companies, usually private or underperforming public ones, and poaches control with the explicit goal of boosting value and then selling the business for a profit. They don't just buy a stake. Typically, they buy control to drive operational and financial change before exiting. I've put a little roadmap to how private equity works from like step by step. I had to research it. I read all about it and I made this little trusty slide, so I hope you enjoy it. But this is sort of the step-by-step process that private equity takes in a brand, all with the goal to ultimately exit the brand either by selling the brand or selling their interest in the brand for more than what they invested. Oftentimes, that does in fact mean selling the brand either to a conglomerate or to another private equity firm that wants the brand. All right. So when you look at it that way, it kind of makes sense why we have so many private equity firms invested in beauty specifically. And I think beauty in and of itself is one of those industries that is primed for this type of, in my opinion, it is predatory. And let me just say this, private equity is involved in so many things, you guys. It's not just beauty. Private equity, if you live in a city or town that had a hospital that all of a sudden had a massive name change that is the same name as 5 other hospitals around you, and they all are suddenly under this umbrella, that's private equity. When all the hospitals have the same name and they're like, we're all in the same network now, that's private equity. What happened is private equity and put them all under one pool, one umbrella, and they are maximizing the profit that they can make off of these hospitals. Healthcare is rife with private equity. It's actually quite horrifying when you read about it. So when you look at it from that perspective of like, it's the whole point is for them to maximize how much money they get out in the end, and they don't really care. And it's so funny because I was visiting so many private equity websites, and it's really it's really quite funny how a lot of them are like, we're there to help brands and to build this, and it gives this really sort of like beautiful sentiment. Oh, we're just all about helping brands in organic ways. And I was reading one particular private equity firm's website, and they never say that they're private equity on the website, which I found very interesting, because at one point I even was like, is this my private equity? Because they're invested in a very popular brand that is growing quite quickly, and it's been already, there's talk that this brand is looking to be sold. If you want to know what that brand is, it's Victoria Beckham Beauty. Victoria Beckham's partner, Neo Investment Partners, is a private equity firm. They invested in her brand when she was just her clothing line, and it expanded to her beauty line when she launched it. Her beauty line has blown up, as we all know. It's actually grown quite organically. I think it was actually really smart the way it grew, because they were direct to consumer only for so long, and by doing that they're able to control the scaling of the brand. And now there's talk that Neo Investors is like prime to sell the beauty arm of Victoria Beckham. this is what we're talking about. And we're sitting here discussing is this is what private equity firms do. So when you look at it from that point of view, it's really quite, I keep saying horrifying, but it is, because so many brands are looking to scale up. They want to be bigger. They want to grow. They want to, so you see so many posts on Instagram of brand owners, like when they go into Ulta and they're like, my dream. And it's like, that's great. I'm happy for you. But also, and how much of your brand did you have to kind of promise to these private equity firms to get to that point? And could you have gotten to that point on your own? Maybe, maybe not, because the reality is most independent brands struggle when they go into Ulta. Prime example, Melt. Melt went into, remember when Melt was like the brand? I was a huge Melt Cosmetics fan. I was like, yes, Melt all day, all day long, all day night. Yes, 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 yes. And then they went into Sephora, and everyone talked about how they started releasing way too many products. The products weren't the same quality, that people felt that they were like losing their edge. And that is kind of what happens when you go into Sephora, because now you go from having this really niche pool of people who love your products and understand your brand point of view and your brand aesthetic and share that, to having this massive audience basically of everyday shoppers who maybe aren't into makeup like that. They're not into it like that, where they're like really all about the Morte palette, to wanting like, I just want some neutrals. I just want like an everyday palette. And the fact that you have to keep people's eyes on your products, and the only way to keep yourself kind of in the conversation is to constantly release. And what's interesting now is what we're seeing with Melt is that Melt is taking a step back from that. They are, they've been trying to extricate themselves. It's very clear. I mean, there hasn't been an announcement, but if you kind of can guess, if you can read the tea leaves and the signs, you can see that their products have been on clearance on Sephora on and off for some years now. And they aren't really releasing all that much new into Sephora at all. Well, everything new that they're releasing is directly on their website. Sephora contracts are usually multi-year, and they're pretty airtight. And once you're locked in, you're locked in. And I get the feeling from Melt that contract was incredibly limiting and probably very detrimental to their bottom line. Because again, 50%. If you're in store, you've got to pay for those end caps. You have to cover any kind of return, any kind of damaged inventory. And if you are a smaller brand, that can be detrimental. And I always would wonder, I would look at Melt and be like, well, how are they doing over there? Because, it felt like they weren't really releasing a whole lot into stores. Everything that they released was on their website. And so I find it very interesting that there's this sort of like backpedaling of trying to get out of that contract. There have been brands, guys, that have been bankrupted from going into Sephora, who were in long legal fights to just get out of contracts with Sephora. Sephora is great if you are a large brand. If you are not a large brand, or you are not a brand that has good private equity backing or venture capital backing, any kind of strong investors, strong investment, you're kind of screwed. It's really interesting because I'm looking at these smaller brands that are doing okay. And I kept Googling and trying to find out if they had private equity, and all of them do. Like your Lisa Eldridge bootstrapped her company to a point. Danessa Myricks has a ton of investors, like a ton of investors. She has a list of investors. She was able to bootstrap to a point, and then she couldn't anymore. She has a private equity firm, a venture capitalist firm. She has a couple of brands that are invested, like other beauty brands that are invested in her brand. She has a long list of investors. And that is why she's been able to sort of go into, and keep in mind that she wasn't in Sephora for a very long time. She was independent, she was direct to consumer, and she had one stockist, which was Beautylish. I think she might have had one more, but I believe the main one was Beautylish. And that was for years. And when she wanted to scale up, she had the backing to do so. And so she has a way to sort of weather the storm of being in Sephora and surviving. But take a Lisa Eldridge, who has been direct to consumer for the majority. Her brand launched in 2018, I believe, 2017, 2018. She started if you remember the beginning of Lisa Eldridge, I don't know if you guys were into makeup at that time. I most certainly was. And the thing that I remember is how she released 3 lipsticks, and you could buy them as a set or you could buy them individually, and that was it. She had 3 lipsticks, guys. She had 3 reds. She had Ribbon, Muse, and Jazz. I had all 3 of those. That's all she had. And then she didn't release anything for months, and then she came out with her pink set. And then she didn't release anything for a while, and then and that's how she grew her brand. And it was all direct to consumer. It was all bootstrap. But even she had to get investors, and she's still mostly direct to consumers, specifically in the States. I don't think she has any stockists here. She has Liberty London in the UK, and I think it's Liberty London and Harvey Nichols. I don't know for sure if it's Harvey Nichols. I'll put the other brand that she has that her products are selling with, like, across the screen if I can find the name. But it was a big deal in the UK when she went to Liberty London, because it was the first time that she had been in stores since her brand had launched in 2018. And I think that was in like 2023 when she went into Liberty London. So, and again, she did it with investors. Now, keep in mind, she has a small investor. Like, she has an investor who has a small investment in her brand. She is still the main investor in her own brand. So I'm giving these examples of how private equity can look for everyone, and also wanting to show you how the bigger the brand, the larger the investment, the bigger the risk for the brand. Not the investor. Like, the investor, people, it's a risk. Private equity is going to be okay. You know what I mean? They may not make as much money out of the brand they thought they were going to get, but they're going to be okay. But when you're a brand owner and you give so much of, you open yourself up so much to that risk when you need to pull in so much investment to get your brand to where you want it to be. Going back to Pat started off small, guys. She started off with like small indie releases, and I think, she did invest in her own brand, but if you look at her packaging, if you look at where the brand started pretty quickly, as far as when she released her motherships, there was probably no way for her, there was no way for her to release that level of luxury all out of pocket on her own. She has money, she's not poor, but she's also, no. At the level that she was releasing, she had to have investment. And I don't think that was a mistake per se, in the sense of, like, she had a vision for what she wanted her brand to be, and to pay for labs in Italy, to pay for the mothership packaging, to pay for those formulations. Those formulations, you guys, were expensive. Those are expensive formulations. That is expensive packaging. And she went into Sephora not long after launching. I believe she launched in 2017. She went into Sephora, I believe, in 2018. Yeah, because I think it was either 2018, end of 2017. And the reason why I know this is because I remember walking into Sephora and seeing the 6-pan palettes, the original 6 pans. She came out with a trio of 6 pans that were like offshoots of the motherships. And those were the first Pat McGrath palettes that I'd ever purchased. And I purchased them in store. Like, I purchased two online and one in store. And it was a big deal that Pat McGrath was in Sephora, because at that point it was sort of like this really cool brand that everyone was talking about that was really high end, and they was like, oh my God. And she was in Sephora. And so she had to have had such an injection of funding for that. And when you look at all of these brands in Ulta, in Sephora, they're either bogged down in private equity, or they are partnered with conglomerates like a Fenty Beauty. Fenty Beauty, if you don't know, is not owned by Rihanna on her own. Rihanna is a 50% owner. She's a co-owner of Fenty Beauty. Fenty Beauty is 50% owned by LVMH's beauty brand offshoot, which is Kendo. Kendo also was the co-owner of KVD Beauty back when Kat Von D was involved. When she was, demolishing the brand with her wacko behavior, they bought her stake from her 50% stake, so they became the sole owner. Well, Kendo quietly sold KVD, and Kendo is shutting down its beauty arm. Like LVMH is shutting down Kendo as far as being a beauty brand operator. So Kendo, which owns 50% of Fenty, which Kendo is owned by LVMH is slowly getting rid of all of its Kendo beauty brands, including Fenty, because LVMH has its shares, its 50% stake in Fenty up for sale. Because a lot of these companies are kind of getting out of the beauty game, guys. And so what we're going to see is a lot of private equity exiting. I think we're seeing some come in, but we're seeing a lot more exiting. We're seeing a lot of conglomerates getting rid of brands. I mean, even Estee Lauder is selling a bunch of their brands. They're selling them as like a package, okay? So it's Too Faced. Who's selling? It's Too Faced and two other brands. Estee Lauder, this is what they're trying to do, is Estee Lauder is trying to sell Too Faced and Dr. Jart and Smashbox as a package. A 3-for-1 type of deal. Buy all three of these brands, take them off our hands. Because a lot of the conglomerates, a lot of the private equity firms, but a lot of the conglomerates are streamlining their portfolios. And so I honestly think we're going to see a lot of movement, not only with private equity firms, but with conglomerates selling off and reshuffling, and a lot of offshoots. Kendo is gonna be no more. There's a couple of other brand incubators that are now, even Pat's original investor, Eurazeo, I always want to say Eurazeo, has completely shut down their brand arm, the arm of their company, their private equity firm that invested in beauty brands and invested in brands. They're no longer doing brands of any kind. Kendo, no longer doing brands of any kind. Estee Lauder, streamlining. We're going to be seeing a lot of this. And I don't know how you guys feel. I have a very negative, after reading all this, I just have a very negative point of view of private equity, because, well, I love the idea of brand owners being able to scale up their business and to take it to the place that they want it to go. I think for me, private equity is sort of a perfect and prime example of the greed of capitalism, like the never-ending cycle of more. And it's only going to, all it seems to do is suck all of the creativity out of a brand, all of the thing that makes the brand interesting, and boils it down to the common denominator, because they feel that the common denominator is the thing that makes money. And the irony of this is that the evidence shows the opposite. Pat was doing great when she was doing the thing that she's known to do. The moment private equity got more involved and watered down to all of these pink releases, people lost interest in the brand. People thought the brand was boring. The same can be said for Charlotte Tilbury. Charlotte Tilbury is another one who, she actually kind of came out of it okay. But I also think it's because she had a very different vision. And this is what I mean when it all depends on how you see your brand going. I think she had a very different vision for her brand. I think her goal was to sell the brand. And so I think she's perfectly fine with the fact that she sold her brand and she stays on as like a, as a consultant. She's like the face of the brand, and she is the creative director, but she's not the owner. Charlotte Tilbury does not own Charlotte Tilbury makeup anymore. And hasn't for some years now. But I think her goal, and she was actually founded the same year, I believe, that Pat McGrath was founded, or maybe a year prior. So they came up at the same time. And I think Charlotte had a very like laser focused view of selling her brand for profit. And I think that worked out for her. But I'm using Charlotte Tilbury as a prime example of when equity takes over, when investors take over, how the brand has sort of this homogenization that, how many times have we all talked about pillow talk, and how many things can we have that are pillow talk? You want to know why? Because like that slide that I showed you guys, private equity hones in on what they think. They look at your cells, they go, oh, pillow talk is your best seller, so we need to do more pillow talk all the time. Same thing with Pat McGrath and Divine Rose. They saw Divine Rose do well. Everything had to be pink. Everything had to be Divine Rose. Rose. We see that. Like, there's no creativity involved. They just look at numbers and they go, this is what's selling, so let's do more of that. It's kind of the same thing as what's happening in Hollywood, which is another thing of private equity getting involved in Hollywood and in movie making. And what you find yourself seeing is a lot of regurgitation of other people's ideas. This is why you have remakes of 15 different, remakes of films and sequels up the wazoo. It's because these people look at numbers. They don't look at creativity. They don't look at why something is popular to begin with. They just go, that did well. Let's do 15 more. That's all they're looking at. And so as a result, I think that is why we're seeing, I know this is why we're seeing this dearth of creativity and exciting things in mainstream beauty. I'm not talking about the beauty space as a whole, because I do think that indie makeup is still doing really interesting things, guys. They are. Some of them they may not be to your taste, or they may not be your aesthetic, but they're really kind of the only ones still doing things that are for their audience and doing things that excite the people that want those things, because they're not trying to cater to the common denominator. They're not trying to cater to everybody. They're okay with not catering to everybody. Singe Beauty, Angelica Nyquist's brand, who is a content creator, she loves color. She's not a neutral girly. Her makeup is colorful. And if you buy her makeup, you know that. And that's what she's catering to. And that's what she's servicing, is those people who like that type of makeup. Even the same with Lisa Eldridge to a certain extent. She's got investment, but it's not at the same level as some other companies. She is still very much doing the thing that makes her brand, and that is what people are attracted to. You know what I mean? So we're seeing how if you want to grow, you kind of have to give up the thing that makes your brand interesting and makes your brand the brand that people were interested in the first place. I would say with Amie Collet, that's not necessarily the case, because their range is very limited. They weren't offering a whole lot as far as their collection. And honestly, this is why I think it should have stayed direct to consumer, because we have to think about how people shop in a Sephora. It's very magpie. It's very like, what's colorful, what's interesting, what's catching my eye. Even if the colors are like basic AF, people are still looking for that. They're still looking for, oh, look at that sparkly pink. Look at that sparkly pink. Look at that neutral. Look at that gold. That's how our brains work. I remember going to Sephora on Michigan Avenue. It's the flagship Sephora in Chicago. It's on Michigan Avenue. It's probably the highest traffic Sephora in the city. And it was packed. And there were so many people clustered around little areas. There's a lot of people in the fragrance department. There were a lot of people at the front of the store where a lot of the luxury makeup was. And then you had a lot of people in the middle where a lot of the like mid-range products, like your Urban Decays, your Anastasias, those brands. And there was a small little end cap with a Micole tucked, and no one was paying any attention to it. Now, that could have been the day, but I was looking at the products and I was looking at how they were displayed on the end cap, and all I could think was, it felt forgotten, and it also felt like it wasn't going to draw attention to by anyone. You know, it wasn't drawing attention. And the only reason I saw the end cap was because I was looking for another brand, and I went, oh, Micole. And I kind of stood there for a while and looked at it, and the product offerings were lovely, but very limited. And all I could think was how, when I was originally going to order from the brand, I went to their website, and I found the website to be a far more pleasant experience than shopping at an end cap in Sephora. I just did. It was just far more pleasant. I could see like swatches on different skin types. I could see the way the lip gloss looked. There were all these, the way the mascara looked. And I wound up ordering the mascara. I didn't order anything else from the brand. That's the only thing I've ever tried from the brand. I thought the mascara was great. It was good, but not great. But yeah, and it just kind of, looking back, it kind of makes me feel a little sad, because I'm just like, this brand was not meant to be in a Sephora. And I look at a brand like Uoma Beauty and I'm like, you know, what if Sharon had stayed direct to consumer and had worked with a smaller investor to grow the brand slowly? I mean, to have 51 shades of foundation and to almost immediately be in Ulta, that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of, and I've talked about Sephora, but Ulta is also just as big of a deal, because they don't take as much of a cut, but they do take a pretty large cut. I think it's between 30 and 40%. And you still have to pay for the end caps. You still have to pay for your marketing. You still have to pay for, you know, your returns and your inventory, all of those things. So the costs are not that different. And I just feel it makes me sad, because I kind of want these brands that are coming up to just be okay with starting slowly and starting small. Everyone wants to be a big dog, you know, and unfortunately, I think, especially again with Black brands, is because you don't have a lot of choice as far as funding goes anyway, that I think a lot of these private equity firms were able to sort of find their in with a lot of these brands. And it's just, it's unfortunate. The conglomerate is very, it's very interesting to me, the conglomerate thing, because I think that's a very different story in a lot of ways. I think when you sell when you work with a conglomerate, you know, you're selling your brand. It's a very different, you're going into it knowing that the whole goal is to sell the brand. Like, take Rhode. I think the whole point of Rhode was to sell eventually. I mean, and that's not a diss to Hailey Bieber or her investor, her partner. I'm not dissing them, but it's very clear that that was the goal. I mean, the fact that they did it so quickly, that they were able to turn it around that quickly, I think they got in while the getting was good, and they got out, which was actually really smart. From a business standpoint, pretty smart. I mean, but that's what when I talk about the different types of brand owners and what people are looking to get out of it, I don't think Pat ever wanted to leave her brand. I think she wanted to own her brand, and she wanted her brand to be huge and big and sustainable. I think Charlotte Tilbury wanted to create a big brand and then sell it. I think Hailey Bieber and her partner wanted to create a big brand and then sell it. I think that Lisa Eldridge wants to keep her brand for herself, and maybe eventually down the road she'll sell it, but it's very clear that she's been scaling her brand pretty steadily in a really organic way. I think that a lot of the indie brands that we shop from want to stay small in the sense of they want to stay manageable for themselves. I think it's unfortunate, though, with the way that the world is working, that it's going to be harder to do that, to keep your brand small and to not take on investment, because between, tariffs and the costs of ingredients, everything has gotten more expensive, and it's very hard for a small brand that is bootstrapping to be able to cover that cost all on their own. So you have this really sad dichotomy where I think this is why we're seeing so many indie brands, like especially right after COVID in these last 2 years, we've seen so many brands go under, and we've seen even big brands go under. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more of private equity selling off their shares in brands, and brands not being able to pivot and get someone else to take that spot as a partner, as an investment partner. I think we're going to see more indie brands have to shutter as long as this whole tariff situation continues, as long as these, inflation is real. I don't see prices dropping anytime soon. I think we're going to see more of it. I do. I think it's really kind of sad in that sense that I think being an indie brand is probably not the easiest way, but the best way to go, but it's also probably the hardest way to go as far as at this point, how much money you can invest and how much you're getting back. Because starting a brand, I looked it up, and it's anywhere to invest in your own brand is tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars, guys. Like, starting your own makeup brand is not cheap. And this is why, when a tiny little indie brand comes out and they only have like 3 things, or, their private label for a little while, and then, like take a Juvia's Place. Juvia's Place was an indie brand that was self-funded for a very long time. I don't know if they have investors. I haven't looked at Juvia's Place in like their investor scenario, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did once they went to Sephora. But for, when you look at the beginnings of that brand, they only had like private label, like their first eyeshadow palette was a private label eyeshadow palette. And it wasn't until they were able to make money that they were able to, go to a lab and have things actually formulated specifically for them. It takes so much money, packaging, formulation. It costs so much money to even just start a brand. And I think that's why you see so many of these brands that are trying to do interesting, innovative things and not having the funding to do it, looking outside of their little circle for help and for helping to scale up. And so I think it just makes it very hard to not fall prey to these private equity firms that are coming in and investing so much and extracting so much in return. I think probably the best example of private equity working for a brand is probably Lisa Eldridge. I keep bringing her up, but after reading about her company, she has invested. She does have private equity, but it's a small amount. It's not like they don't own a huge chunk of her company. They don't have a huge investment in her company. She is still the largest investor in her company. But I also think one of the reasons why she was able to do that is because she's a really successful makeup artist. Same for Pat. I think the reason why Pat was even able to start her brand is because they were both very successful makeup artists who had the capital, their own capital, to pour into the brand. Most people who start companies, who start makeup brands, don't have that. Diara didn't have that. She had experience. She had connections because she'd worked at L'Oreal and she'd worked at other brands. And I think that's why she was able to get, angel investors, and she also had, investment from L'Oreal. But even still, even with all of that, she didn't get a huge investment. And again, that goes back into how Black-owned brands are invested, how they're funded, what they get out of it. I think Pat was able to get a lot of it because she was Pat freaking McGrath, like she's an icon. And so I think investors were like, oh yes, let's give her all the money. I think that's another reason why the brand was overvaluated. I think they were like, this brand's going to make so much money. It's luxury. It's Pat McGrath. Let's evaluate it at $1 billion. That brand should never have been valuated at $1 billion. That's ridiculous. A brand that had been around for like 2 years. I think Elf overpaid for Rhode, but hey ho, what do you know? That's not my money. But my point is these overvaluations it's just like numbers. It's like pick a number, any number, and I think if that brand had been valuated in honest way. I don't necessarily know that the brand would be in the place that it's in, because I think the sales, what they were expecting the brand to hit as far as sales, would have been more realistic. Pat's brand made money. It continues to make money. That's the irony, is that this idea that Pat was like not making money. The issue wasn't that she wasn't making money, is that she wasn't making money at the rate that the private equity wanted her to make it at, for the rate that they wanted on their return, on their investment. All right, guys, so I guess I've been talking. I've been talking long enough. My camera just stopped. It was like, you're done. So I restarted it. But wrapping this all up, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about this? I feel like I wanted to give you guys some facts, but I also just wanted to kind of like I said, I love talking off the dome and sort of just giving you my thoughts, and organically, because I think that's what it's my channel. That's what I'm doing. But let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about private equity in the beauty space? Specifically, I think it's well established private equity is trash, but I really want to know what you guys think, because I feel like after doing all of this research about who's invested and who's invested and who's got what, I think it's just very interesting. I don't think it's going to end well. That sounds terrible. That sounds very dramatic, but I don't feel like, I think there's going to be a beauty apocalypse. I'm calling it. I think there's going to be a mass exodus, because there has been a slow trickle of an exodus. And so I think the overarching theme that I'm seeing, based off of the things that I'm reading and the things that I've researched, is that a lot of these companies are getting out of the beauty business. And what does that mean for the brands that they're invested in, that rely on those investments to stay solvent? Yeah, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, guys, please be sure to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I don't know if the next one will be a commentary video, by the way. I feel like I want to take a little bit of a break, talk about some actual makeup. You let me know. But I do want to say this. There is another video that I have in mind. I'm a little scared, y'all, because it's a big topic. It's a very timely topic. And it is one that I think we all will have very strong feelings about. But yeah, that is what I'm probably going to be working on next, if I do another sort of like talky video, which I will. But I'm going to take a little break to kind of just relax a little bit, because I've been on one with this one. But yes, let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.